Welcome in, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tristan Warner with Clockwork Sports. Today we have a very special guest joining us. It is Cody Main from Establish the Run. Cody, how you doing?
I am great, Tristan. Thanks for having me on. We are now on the eve of NFL season kicking off. Thursday night showdown is bound to be a fun one, and I'm looking forward to it, man.
Same here. Same here. Can't wait. Full disclosure, me and Cody did record this yesterday, and being the newbie that I am, I forgot to press record. So we're running it back again. Shout out to Cody for meeting with me not once, but twice. Very appreciative for that. So shout out to Cody. And this video comes at a perfect time because he just released an article this week covering Showdown from a macro perspective. And this video and Cody's article are evergreen, meaning it'll be beneficial to you whether you read today or tomorrow or after the season starts. You can read it anytime, and you will find it beneficial for sure. You can find that article at Establish the Run's website or on Cody's Twitter account, which is at cmain7. Do yourself a favor, follow him. I am positive that his content will make you a better player. So with that being said, Cody, do you mind if we jump into this article?
Let's do it, man.
Awesome. Okay, let me switch over here, and we got the your article up on the screen here. So like I said, yeah, Establish the Run. This is their website. This is completely free. Anyone can go view it, not behind the paywall. So I'd highly recommend reading through this all yourself. We'll kind of cover it. We'll skim through it, ask some questions, but definitely you should read it on your own. So with that being said, we're at the first graph here, which I find really interesting. And this is, you can see up here, this is the Draftkings large field GPP captain ownership. And the black bars compare the total lineups, and the green bars compare the top 1% of lineups. And my question was, Cody, when looking at this, we can see that quarterbacks and wide receivers pretty efficiently were played by the field, in the right around 2%. So not a big difference there between the total lineups and the top 1% of lineups. However, running backs, we can see a little bit of an edge here, almost 4% difference, and the field's actually coming in lower on running back captain ownership than compared to the top 1% of lineups. So I was wondering, Cody, do you think this is something that will remain stagnant this year? And should we be looking to play more running backs at captain when the opportunity presents itself?
I think generally speaking, we certainly should be considering the running backs a little bit more often than the field has historically. And I think heading into the 2022 season, we've seen this shift in captain ownership since Showdown has kind of come into the forefront. We knew early on it was quarterbacks. And then the field kind of made this shift, and that happened more so last season with wide receivers. And that was obviously prevalent because of the DraftKings scoring environment, full PPR scoring, 100-yard bonus for receivers that get over 100 yards. We have the same situation, though, for running backs, though, right? And obviously running backs can account for a higher percentage of touchdowns as well if their teams are running near the goal line. So I think that it is something, and I'll be monitoring closely as I do with each slate, but I'll kind of be seeing how the field is adjusting in 2022. And if they are still underplaying running backs, at least generally speaking, I think there's still a little bit of an edge there.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, with pricing as efficient as it is, and just the casual player becoming better and better, any edge that we can exploit, even if it's this small, I think is something to take advantage of. So this data is super helpful, especially if you haven't viewed anything like this before. I think it's really helpful. So if we jump down to, this is a similar graph here, but it just covers the games that have a total of 51 points or higher. And again, it's same deal, total lineups in black, top 1% of lineups in green. And you can see here that the running back splits is even vaster and or more vast, excuse me. And Cody even mentions that in the article here. It says that the running back delta is the widest margin by a pretty significant amount. So and I think just intuitively people see the high total and they want to play quarterbacks, wide receivers, and then kind of running backs go under the radar a bit. I was wondering, Cody, why do you think this is? Do you think this is a cognitive bias from seeing that high number, or do you attribute it to something else?
I think that's exactly what it is, and I think it's a little bit kind of narrative based in the sense that you see the high total and your brain initially thinks shootout, and yeah, of course that's going to happen. You still see it. Their wide receivers are the most exposed captain, right in top 1% lineups, but the field's still overplaying them by a little bit, I think, and I don't think wide receivers are wrong. Certainly, as we'll get into here at the end with the Bills Rams showdown, right? I mean, a lot of points are going to be scored, a lot of fun wide
Right.
receivers to play in those games, and you got some messy backfields there, right?
Hmm.
So I think there's a combination of high totals initially make our brains think more scoring, which initially makes us think, more wide receiver production, more quarterback production, and you see the ownership there on the running backs get brought down a little bit. So, an 8% delta between what the field has done and what top 1% winning lineups are doing. I'm almost always focusing on the field versus like top 1% stuff. I just want to know what my opponents are doing. I think that's more predictable than what's going to win. But if I know that ownership at the captain position, especially in high total games on the running backs, is going to be lower, then I'll take my shots there. I'll take my shots. Thursday coming up, we got Devin Singletary, we've got guys like Daryl Henderson, going to be extremely low owned at the captain position, and I might try and find some positive leverage there if at all possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point too, because especially football, but really all sports, there's a bit of randomness involved, and with football, it's very random, very volatile. So if you can figure out what your opponents are doing and play into that, and just like Cody said, that's more predictable than what's going to happen in the game. Then there's a bit of an edge there too. Just if you know what your opponent's doing, you really don't even need to know what's happening in the game. But if you know what your opponent's doing, we can create leverage off of that. And I think that's a really, really smart strategy to have. So, and I should mention too that we neither Cody or I is saying, blindly play running back in the captain spot every
Right.
single time you're able. What we are saying is the field is not doing it enough. And that's where the edge might be. So we're not saying 100% captain Devin Singletary on Thursday.
Right.
More what we're saying is that you should be considering it a little bit more because it's clear that the field isn't. So
Yeah, you nailed it. And the thing is, like, we're really good at predicting ownership because
Mhm.
it's we know what the market is going to do. We know where the field is going to gravitate towards in terms of their player ownership. We're not great at predicting performance. I mean, if you look at any sort of correlation metric or R squared or whatever you want to use in terms of fantasy points projected versus fantasy points scored,
Mm.
and compare that to ownership projected versus actual ownership, there's a huge difference between how good we are at predicting both of those things. So if I can know what the field is going to do, I will take my chances on kind of running hot on the variance, and if I can get some positive leverage there in terms of capturing a ceiling on a guy, that is a spot that I want to be in, and I think that's a good example there with the running backs in high total games.
100%, 100%. Yeah, and Cody explains it really, really well and in depth here in the article. So I know I've said it a few times, but for sure you should go through and read it yourself. So the next part we'll move to is, this captain ownership. I don't think we talked about this yesterday, Cody, but I did want to bring it up just because I thought it was really important, and I should have mentioned it yesterday. But you mentioned here the average ownership for winning lineups for the captain is 10.3%. And then I'm quoting here, suggesting there's little need to stray too far from the field when constructing our captain player pool. I think this is really important because I think that casual players, maybe their strategy, especially when starting out, might be to just jam as many studs into the lineup as possible, and the easiest way to do that is through a cheap captain. Um, so, Cody, when you're building your lineups, are you first identifying players that you want to play at captain and then check ownership, or what's your order of operation, or is it more situational based on the slate?
Yeah, for the most part, I am kind of leaning on our projections
Mm.
at Establish the Run to kind of determine what my player pool is going to be. I think the one biggest mistake, and you mentioned salary and the field wanting to kind of jam in the studs at flex if you can get that cheap captain. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that casual players and new showdown players make is that you think, "Hey, if my captain is $2,500 and he can just beat his median, which his median projection might be, 7 or 8 points on the high end. If he just beats his median, then I've got all this extra salary to spend up for these studs. And if they beat their medians, then I'm gravy. But
Mm.
you really, that's not enough
Right.
if you're playing large field tournaments. You need your captain, not if it's a cheap one, especially not just to beat their median salary, but they have to beat that by a huge number,
Yeah.
like 2.6x their projection on average. So I think that's one of the bigger mistakes. I'm mostly looking for guys that I know have that consistent ceiling. Even on the lower end, like there's a guy in this slate, which is a perfect example. Isaiah McKenzie
Mm.
is 2,400, going to be very popular, I think, at captain because he does make those things fit. He's one example where I think like Isaiah McKenzie's true ceiling as the starting slot wide receiver for Buffalo is the highest scorer on the slate. It might be really narrow range of outcomes for him to achieve that ceiling with Diggs and Cup and Allen and other guys on the team, but I think he's got the profile that he could at least do it. So he's not a guy that I would entirely write off.
Mm,
I think the biggest takeaway there and just how often top 1% lineups are how much they're spending at captain and how much ownership they're playing at captain is pretty uh, indicative of the guys that we should be targeting. We don't need to find these crazy dust balls that are 0.2% owned at captain
yeah.
to either A, get unique, or B, to try and fit all the studs and flex.
For sure. And to your point, Cody, it's, pricing is usually very efficient. For Showdown, for DraftKings, FanDuel, whatever the case may be, it's usually very efficient. And I think because Isaiah McKenzie, I think when the Showdown slate was created, was maybe going to come in as the fourth wide receiver, because it's clear that they have. I'll pull this up really quick. They have Jamison Crowder at $5,000, and then Isaiah McKenzie at 2.4 K. So I think it's just, maybe a case of them releasing the Showdown a little too early and not having all the information. But just like Cody said, usually, we would try to stray away from these high owned, like cheaper players. But because it might be a pricing mistake, Cody's saying don't write him off completely like we may for another slate when the pricing is more efficient, and where like McKenzie and Crowder's projections or prices might be changed in future slates. That I think that's the point Cody's trying to make there. So let's jump into the next question I had, Cody. It was the captain QB plus their pass catchers. And in this first sentence here, you mentioned that the field has lagged on double stacking their quarterbacks, which I found really interesting. And then vice versa, only stacking your captain quarterback with one pass catcher has kind of been overplayed a little bit. With stacking being as prevalent as it is, Cody, and just how much it's discussed and how much more casual players are catching on to this, do you think this is something the field will catch up to this year, or do you think it's something that could remain an edge?
This is definitely one that we and I will be closely monitoring as
Mm,
the season starts. And as I mentioned out the front, like I'm tracking every primetime Showdown slate and doing this same type of analysis for each Showdown slate after the fact. So I should have a pretty good idea pretty early on in the season how often the field is doing this and,
mm,
versus how often we think they should be doing it. But stacking's been one of those things where it was taboo when we first started playing. Like, oh my God, you're pairing your wide receiver with your quarterback, even in main slate. Back in
yeah.
the early days of DFS, and then it's become double stacking in main slate, and it doesn't seem like the field is still doing it enough as they should. But
Mm,
this might be the year where we see it flip. Obviously, still a pretty big edge. If you are playing captain quarterback, very good example again Thursday night. This is a perfect Showdown slate to kind of have these macro discussions with, but also talk about the upcoming slate too, because Josh Allen is way too underutilized with two of his pass catchers when he's rostered at captain, in my opinion. I think you could even go to three with a team that's going to throw as much as the Bills. But it's so obvious when you think about it from the perspective of like, hey, if my quarterback that's rostered at captain is going to be the optimal captain, and I'm pairing him with just one wide receiver, well, you really are trying to thread this really fine needle where you need a lot of that passing production to funnel to the one guy that you're rostering, but not so much so that one guy ends up beating your quarterback who you're
mm,
rostering a captain. So, intuitively, I think it makes sense when you think about it from that perspective of like, okay, I need the pass production to be a little bit more evenly distributed, because in those events, the wide receivers won't beat my quarterback and be a better captain option than my quarterback. So again, one of those things that I no hard fast rules for me really in Showdown ever. And certainly you could get a rushing quarterback or a quarterback who does funnel a lot of the production to one guy and he's still the optimal captain. But I think in most cases, we should always be thinking in terms of like, how does this lineup work? If my quarterback is optimal, how many pass catchers is he going to be paired with? And I think most often we should be using two or even three.
Yeah, that's awesome, Cody. And I did have your I have your tweet pulled up right now about the Josh Allen number of pass catchers. I think this is awesome. And again, like I mentioned earlier, if you're not following Cody on Twitter, you need to be. It's at CMain7. And yeah, this graph is awesome, and it's very similar to the stuff we're talking about here in his his general Showdown article. But this is like a specific example of what he's talking about here. So I was planning to bring this up later when we discuss the showdown happening tomorrow, but I figured that was a perfect time to bring it up. So yeah, again, go follow him on Twitter, and yeah, just like he said, you can see the delta between two pass catchers, and this is specific to Josh Allen. And 12, almost a 12% difference between two pass catchers paired with Josh Allen, and even like Cody mentioned, even throwing in three pass catchers, the field's underplaying that slightly, a little bit more than 3%. So I think that's a great point by Cody. This is up on his Twitter, so you can go check that out anytime. So let's move on to the salary. And this was something I was really happy to see in your article, Cody, because this is a strategy that I've used for quite some time. And sometimes I struggle to explain what the benefits are. I can explain it pretty well, but having this visual graph, I think, is super, super helpful. And let me explain this really quick. We have the duplicates on the left-hand side here, and then on the bottom, the x-axis, we have the salary used over here. And you can see when you use all $50,000 of your salary, on average, that lineup is going to be duplicated more than 25 times. So even if you do end up, having the nuts lineup, and you're going to be splitting it with, 27-ish of your best friends. So it's not really that beneficial to play into that many duplicates. And just by dropping down $500, if we spend $49,500, you're now in the 15 duplicated range. So by just dropping down that $500, you get 10 less duplicates per lineup in the same tournament, and that's huge. And so and the farther you drop down, obviously the less likely your lineup is to be duplicated. So Cody, my question is at what point does this become overkill, and what is the minimum amount of salary you're willing to spend on a certain lineup?
Yeah, I think this is in duplicates. I'm glad that there's more discussion about duplicates now. When I first started with Showdown stuff, like first started writing content, it wasn't very heavily discussed beyond like salary and ownership and things like that. But now I think it's really the kind of the third thing that you need to consider. Obviously, captain selection is the most important. It's the roster spot that's going to score 1.5x. It obviously costs the most. And then correlating around that was something I think most people were talking about in terms of, how many pass catchers do I pair with my quarterback? Can I play both running backs together? Can I play the opposing defense? People were thinking about that, a couple of years ago when I first started playing Showdown and writing about Showdown. But I think the duplicate stuff has gotten much better, and I think the field is getting much better at it. It's kind of that third thing that you need to consider, and salary is really one of the easiest ways you can avoid duplicates. If you're optimizing, if you're using any sort of lineup optimizer, it's probably the easiest lever you can pull in terms of reducing the expected dupes for your lineup. I think the biggest takeaway from this graph and from doing this analysis for me is like there is that point of diminishing returns where like you get too low and all of a sudden you're playing a worse lineup that maybe is just slightly less duplicated than a better lineup that would spend more salary. As we've already mentioned, pricing is pretty efficient on DraftKings. So you really are using this as just a tool to get different. And I think once you get to a certain point, I cut the graph off at 47, but maybe that's even a little bit higher than that, 47.5, maybe even closer to 48K. But it's just one of a few levers that we can pull in terms of trying to reduce our duplicates. So if I know I've got a lineup that is otherwise very chalky, then I will be willing to leave more salary on the table. If I know I've already done a few things that are going to get me unique, then in those instances, I will be willing to spend more salary. So I don't set any hard caps for myself, either on a minimum or a maximum in. There are lineups that I will certainly play that are 50K, but I'll be doing some really weird stuff in those lineups to make sure they're less duplicated. But I think that the biggest takeaway here is that, at some point, you got to start spending some money because of the pricing and how efficient we think it is on DraftKings. And you just get to this point where you're playing worse lineups that aren't that much less duplicated.
100%. Yeah, we want to be unique without giving up a lot of projection, right? So,
Right.
And what when you're spending $50,000 and you drop down to 49.5, and you're significantly decreasing your chances for a dupe, or at least the amount of duplicates. That could be as simple as dropping down from the more expensive kicker down to the less expensive kicker. Something that simple where you're giving up maybe, 0.5 in projection, and you're going to get 10 more than 10 less duplicated lineups. I think that's kind of the direction you want to go. You don't want to just not spend your full salary and not have a good lineup as well. You want to get unique while also creating smart lineups for sure. So
And this is it gets talked about from an optimizer perspective because it's just easier. Every optimizer's got a minimum and maximum
right.
salary cap that you can set. But if you're hand building too, if you've got a lineup that your last piece in is Gabriel Davis, and you realize that lineup this week is going to leave you right at 50K. If you drop from Gabe Davis to even his teammate Jamison Crowder, you're sacrificing quite a bit of projection, but you're also sacrificing $2,200 in salary, and would almost guarantee that's going to make you more unique. So those are the kind of things that I think through. There's no right or wrong answer for how much salary you should spend. It's all kind of dependent on the lineup, which is just a cop out answer. But that's one kind of real life example that even if you're hand building a lineup, dropping from Gabe Davis to teammate Jamison Crowder, sacrificing a little bit of salary, sacrificing a little bit of projection, is going to get you way more unique and make your lineup probably higher expected value overall.
For sure. And if you're not first, you're last, especially in these large field GPP tournaments. So our goal is to get first and hopefully a solo first. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the point that me and Cody are trying to make, is that even giving up projections sometimes and making yourself unique is sometimes better than playing into that ownership in the long run. Of course, in the long run, we're all doing this. If you take everything in small samples, you're going to get drastically different numbers than if you look at it from the long point of view. So that's a great point by Cody there. I think he explained it very, very well. Last question I had, Cody, was I had a buddy, one of our moderators from our Discord, Johnny, one of our great moderators. He was wondering, he plays some Showdown cash sometimes, and if you're not familiar with cash games, that's just 50-50s, double ups, and head-to-heads. And he was curious if you think that there's any edge to Showdown cash, or even if you play Showdown cash at all.
Yeah, I don't want to give off the impression that I'm grinding Showdown cash. So there's probably somebody better equipped to discuss this than myself. I'm more of the large field GPP player. As we've talked about on the show already. I think my edge is structurally building lineups as opposed to individually picking players or understanding how a single game is going to shake out. So I think that I'm better served sticking in the streets where I can just tell an optimizer what to do and it can spit out some plus EV unique lineups for me for large field GPPs. But I will say, if you want to play Showdown Cash, I think Adam Levitan, obviously founder of Establish the Run, puts out a really good article on contest selection for classic slates and DFS. And I think that a lot of that is applicable to Showdown Cash as well. If you want to play Showdown Cash, I think you should be sticking to single entry large field double ups. The large single entry $5, $10, $25, whatever your buy-in range is. You're going to avoid more sharp players in those because those sharp players are maxing those, right? If you have 150 potential lineups that you can play in a $5 buy-in, sharp cash game players are going to put in 150 lineups. So you can avoid that just by simply playing the single entry ones. And same thing, like if you want to play head-to-heads. He talks about if you wanted to play $25 in head-to-heads on a classic slate, you would do 25 $1 buy-ins and post all of those as opposed to scooping them. And you can do the same thing for Showdown Cash. If you want to play $25 in Showdown Cash, I would not play one $25 Showdown entry. I would play 25 $1 Showdown head-to-head. So those are a few things you can do from a contest selection standpoint. And then from there, I think you just need to get a good set of median projections that are hopefully accounting for all of the things that we've kind of talked about today in terms of game script and things of that nature. So Establish the Run, I think, is a good place to go for that if you guys are looking for a good set of projections and want to play Showdown Cash. But if I was going to be playing high volume, I would most likely be using something pretty close to what our optimal lineup is and just making a few tweaks to try and avoid zeros, if you will. Try and avoid those really low scores from potentially low dollar guys that pop as decent value. So I don't want to sound like I can talk about a game that I don't play a bunch of, but Showdown Cash, if you're a true grinder if you're playing Showdown Cash.
That's true. That's very true. Very true. Yeah, I totally agree. I'm not much of a cash player in general, and definitely not for Showdown. On occasion, I'll dip my toes in, but I for the most part agree with what Cody's saying. So, Cody, if you don't mind, I'd love to just spend a couple minutes going over the showdown for tomorrow night.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
Okay, cool. I'll pull up I have Fantasy Labs Optimizer open here with the aggregated projection set. Established runs projections are a part of these. I have like 4 or 5 just kind of averaged out. Established runs projections are awesome, but they are behind the paywall. I don't want to share that with anyone. So this is an aggregated projection set between like 4 or 5 different sites. Very interesting showdown slate because we have arguably, the highest ceiling wide receiver and I think undoubtedly the highest ceiling quarterback on the slate, Josh Allen and Cooper Kupp. Now, of course, these guys are going to come with some ownership, but that doesn't mean that you can't play these guys at captain, like we mentioned before. But it does mean that you will probably get unique. You will need to get unique with the rest of your lineup if you want to differentiate yourself from the field. So, if you wouldn't mind sharing, Cody, are Josh Allen and Cooper Kupp, is that where you'll be focusing your captain spots? And if so, how are you planning to get different elsewhere?
I'm still trying to figure out what I think the field is going to do because Cooper Kupp is kind of this unique beast. Obviously, the highest priced player on the slate at 12,400, even $400 more expensive than Josh Allen, which seems crazy given their respective projections. But just kind of looking across the market, it seems to me like most people are kind of in line with where we're at on Cooper Kupp being a few points shy of Josh Allen's projection and Josh Allen being $400 cheaper. I think that's going to drive a lot of ownership to Josh Allen at captain and might actually leave Cooper Kupp a little bit underowned relative to where we might usually try to get him at. So right now I've got 16.9% projected ownership on Cooper Kupp at captain. I don't know if that holds or if it comes in even lower. I think I would want to get way over that number
Yeah.
just because of his range of outcomes and what we're used to having to pay in terms of ownership to get Cooper Kupp at captain. But conversely, like if I get the sense that people just want to jam it in because it's Cooper Kupp and they're kind of ignoring the projections, then all of a sudden I want to play a lot more Josh Allen.
Right.
I think the one takeaway though is that these two are going to soak up a ton of ownership, and if you're into guys like Diggs or A-Rob or Gabe Davis, who I know the fantasy community loves as a whole, if you're into these guys, I think you're going to get pretty good captain ownership on them. And that's I mean, I'm going to be living in this range. And I talked a little bit about Devin Singletary, maybe some Darrell Henderson or Cam Akers. Maybe I'll get there if the ownership is low enough, but I want to get paid off in a big way with projected ownership. If I'm playing those guys, even 4 or 5% captain ownership projected would be a little bit too high for me. If I get the sense it's going to be 2 or 3, I'll be all over that. But I think that they're pretty thin to outscore those guys right above them.
Yeah, totally agree. And one way, I mean, when I was building a little bit earlier, and really the easiest way to get Cooper Kupp or Josh Allen in the captain spot is to go down and find one of these cheaper guys like Isaiah McKenzie, maybe Ben Skowronek, some of these guys that are kind of thinner. So I think when I'm just looking through it, my initial instinct is to try to get those guys and get different elsewhere, like we said, and maybe limiting my exposure to McKenzie, even though I do think he's a really good play, like we mentioned, but maybe just coming in below the field simply because I think that that's how everyone is going to make their Cooper Kupp, Josh Allen captain lineups work. So that's kind of something that I was filtering through. The running backs, like we were mentioning earlier, with there being a bit of edge there, this might be the time to do it. Like Cody said, they might come in really low owned. And part of that is because these backfields are a little bit of a mystery. We don't really know how the splits are going to happen, especially with the Bills, the new addition of James Cook, and then Henderson and Akers. I know they've both dealt with injuries this offseason, and so it'll just be really interesting to see those splits. And because the field, we don't know, and because the field doesn't know, there might be a little bit of an edge there. So I think that's a great point by Cody. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. Do you have any other general thoughts on the showdown? Cody, I do want to bring up this Twitter post of yours one more time, because I do think it is really important that if we're going to play Josh Allen at the captain spot, at least historically, that it would make sense to pair him with at least 2 pass catchers and maybe even 3. So is that kind of the direction you're leaning, Cody, for your Josh Allen captain lineups?
Yeah, I'll give a real micro take to kind of add to the macro there on the captain plus 2 plus wide, 2 plus wide receivers or pass catchers in general. Captain Josh Allen with Stephon Diggs with Jamison Crowder. Like the field and even us at ETR, we're really confident that Isaiah McKenzie is the starting slot receiver. In Buffalo, we're really confident that he's got this big role ahead of Jamison Crowder. I think we have good reason to feel that way, from a median/mean perspective. But I think that there are some outcomes here where, hey, maybe he was nicked up this week, isn't 100%, and or we're just wrong on the projection, and Jamison Crowder is going to play more than we expect. He's $2,600 more expensive, which makes him kind of a terrible play from a median perspective because his projection's just worse. But he's not going to be owned at all. I think right now we have 10%. I think it would come in even lower than that. So you want to play a high-owned Josh Allen. You want to pair him with a couple of wide receivers. What if we're just wrong on the slot split for Isaiah McKenzie and Jamison Crowder? Or maybe Crowder just runs hot on touchdown efficiency and happens to be the guy that falls in the end zone. I like that as a way to get unique in an otherwise popular captain Josh Allen lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Cody, I'm curious, do you have in front of you Isaiah McKenzie's ownership?
Yeah, I think we're actually probably light on Isaiah McKenzie ownership as it stands. And obviously, if you guys are ETR subs or considering, we'll have final ownership updates tomorrow before lock. We have it at 20.9% right now. And just talking through this slate and thinking through lineup construction, would not be shocked if he's a guy that gets up to closer to 30 in flagship GPP. He's just going to make everything work. Every optimizer loves him. I think anyone that's hand building and has been drafting throughout the summer, I think they know Isaiah McKenzie. So I think he's going to find his way into a lot of lineups.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that 20% is probably a little light, and 30% I think is much more in the range of where he comes. And yeah, like you said, if Jamison Crowder comes in 10% or less, that's massive leverage on the field if we are wrong on Crowder, being the 4 or McKenzie being the 3, or like you said, Crowder runs hot. Maybe he doesn't get that many snaps, but he scores a touchdown, and then bada bing, bada boom, we're in there, So
exactly,
I think that's great leverage, especially for the first Showdown slate of the year where everyone is kind of guessing a little bit, So
right, no better time than week 1, especially Thursday. We got no data right now. We've all been firing off best ball drafts all summer. We've all got these takes. No better time than week 1 to get unique.
Yep, totally. So awesome, Cody. I don't have any more questions. I really appreciate you joining me for a second time today. I will leave the floor open to you. If you have anything to plug, go ahead. Floor is yours.
Yeah, nothing else for me. I hope you guys I hope you guys found this valuable. Go check out the free article that we've been referencing here today. Obviously, hope you'll join us for the regular season. For every Showdown slate, we will be doing live shows before lock. So hope you'll join us at Establish the Run. We would love to see you there. That's all I've plugged. Just check us out at ETR.
Awesome. Thanks again, Cody. I really appreciate you, and have a great NFL season.
Thanks, you too, buddy. Let's make some money.
All right. See you, Cody.